was one of those upperclassmen when I was a student, and we were talking, and the last time I saw Andrew, it was a sunny day in June, at the parking lot at 112th and Market, our old school. At the end of the parking lot where I'd planted 14 fir trees as a border was a sort of light blue Toyota, I think, that he was trying to sell to me as he was headed out to New York to become the science and naturopathic knowledge behind the first of 3 bobbings up of Dr. Atkins. And so it's great, 33 years later, just like yesterday, saying goodbye to a friend. One of our really esteemed full naturopathic medicine, nature cure, homeopathic, brilliant compliment from Connecticut now, Dr. Andrew Rubman.
Thank you. It was a Datsun B210 that Dr. Steve Austin encouraged me to become a mechanic of, and it kind of taught me a lesson about how I wanted to practice, and that was try to learn as much about your external environment and that which you interact with in order to provide you with the most consistency in the way that you interact so that what you do actually helps, which was a wonderful concept. Just a brief bit of background. I became interested first in botanical medicine when I got a big bruise on my leg during a soccer game in the mid-60s. And a friend of mine who owned the health food store, I was rather suspicious of health foods, but he was a friend of Greg Corso and Jack Kerouac, and so I figured, well, anybody that hip has to have good knowledge. And he said, come on down to the store and I'll sell you a comfrey root powder and you can make a poultice. And I said, yeah, right, okay. Poultice, right? But in the back of my mind, I remembered that the situation I grew up in, where I had working parents and I had a nanny who was a woman with a beautiful cafe au lait complexion from Kannapolis, North Carolina, who used to tell me about poultices and not picking my scabs and eating my greens and all of the common wisdom which was lost on relatively sophisticated New York urbanites. So I agreed to do it, and I put the poultice on, and I woke up the next morning with no pain but a horribly discolored area on my leg. Asked him what to do. He said, repeat it again. And by the next morning, everything was gone, from a black and blue mark that had really been quite dramatic and pain to the point where I was hobbling within 48 hours, being as if I'd never run into anything like that or had a soccer ball hit me so hard. And so I knew that there was something, as the bard says, going on, but you don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. And I began to become interested in herbal medicine, and he said, buy this book and start to read it, and it was Back to Eden by Kloss. And I became so enamored of it that I became the town herbalist. And so I had people calling to make an appointment to see me and discuss their ills, and I would consult my Kloss and then my second book, Maud Greaves, A Modern Herbal, and begin to put together combinations of roots, barks, berries, etc. And I told them how to infuse and decoct and whatever and do these things. And it was quite nice. I was actually supporting myself as a lay herbalist, well outside of the law, obviously. But a friend of mine was a medical doctor who was quite alternatively oriented, shall we say. Listen, you have to go to medical school. I said, I don't want to go to medical school. I don't like to hang out with medical doctors. Most of them irritate me. I don't think I'd do anything more than go out to dinner with one begrudgingly, spending 4 years. I said, that's impossible. He said, no, you don't understand. Number one, if you get popular enough, one of my friends is going to complain to the authorities and you're going to be in jail. Okay, they have that much juice. And the other thing is you'll hurt someone because you're sitting at the piano and playing with your fists. So what do you mean? He said, you need to know your way around the human body. You have to submit to formal study. Otherwise, you're going to hurt someone and you're going to feel terrible about it. So I gathered all of my credits and whatever and applied to this weird school, which was in Portland but was in Kansas for some reason. Went out to Kansas and convinced the people that I was the right sort to take the program, and ended up in school with Francis Brinker and Ed Allstat and a whole gang of some very, very interesting people. And what I can tell you honestly is that we learned a great deal from the professors and from the formal study, but in point of fact, I learned more from my fellow students and what they were bringing to the table. Not so much in terms of empirical knowledge, but in terms of perspective and orientation, in being able to quiet yourself inside and listen to what other people are saying and feeling and empathizing. And I started looking at botanical medicine and the continuum of these medicines, some of which seem to be very innocuous things, some of which seem to be almost troubling in a way that they were very, very toxic, or they were advanced as such. And I thought to myself, well, why are these things being used, and how can one put them together in combination? And then I realized that I needed to shut my yap and I needed to pay attention to the clinicians and begin to get ideas from what other people who were senior to me were doing in the clinic. And this is my message to my well-intentioned allopathic friends who want to be holistic medical doctors. That's wonderful. Discover it, learn about it, become empathetic with it, and then refer them to me. Don't do it yourself because you're going to get into trouble. It's too complex. Why do I say that? To be defensive? No, because I'm still learning about putting it together. It's an ongoing situation. But I wanted to talk today about one of the most marvelous things that I found out about botanical medicine and about treating people was that there is a continuum between the pure physiological effects of the properly extracted botanical and the very, very unusual, sometimes ephemeral, energetic effects ascribed to homeopathic preparations. And we use many of the same preparations for their botanical use and for their homeopathic use. And I began to become aware of the fact that the eclectics were reaching out and embracing both of these areas of power of the plants to be able to get the proper effect that they were looking for with an individual. A point of fact, an interesting patient that I treated that had a need for both the energetic and the physiological effects of a preparation to give her what she needed. And in this case, it wasn't a botanical, it was a mineral, and it was the mineral sulfur. Sulfur is perhaps one of the deepest acting minerals in the homeopathic pharmacopoeia. And sulfur in the physiological phase is one of the most interesting molecules that one can use in harnessing physiological medicine, because it has this very unusual bond angle in it, right down at the molecular level. Rather than sulfur molecules bonding to other molecules in a straight line or in a 90-degree bond, it has an off-angle bond, so it makes it inherently springy. The ladder rungs in the DNA strands are sulfur. The connective tissue, the elastic tissues in the body are sulfur-containing compounds. So there's this inherent springiness from the DNA level all the way up through the tissue level. And energetically, it suggests resiliency beyond challenge, what one needs to allow to cull forth from within that allows us to adapt rather than to be broken by challenges. I came back from a lunch break and I walked into my office and saw the back of my next patient and saw a woman in a Jesuit nun's outfit. And I was delighted but a little bit surprised. I don't promote myself as a deeply religious man, but I'm glad when I'm recognized as such. So I said, "Sister, how can I be of service to you?" And she said, "Well, Father said that you might be of help to me." I said, "Well, what seems to be the problem?" "My legs and my joints have been getting stiff because I haven't been getting enough sleep, I think." "Oh, well, why is that? Is your routine disturbed?" "Yes, for the past 2 weeks. I've been waking up at 4 a.m. because I'm being raped by Satan." And, I'm looking for the camera in the purse or from something, So you take a deep breath and you say, well, this is going to be strange no matter how it works out. And I spoke with her a little while longer and I realized that what was coming up for her was memories of child abuse by a male relative that had lived in the house of both her and her sister when she was very young. And this was the way that it was manifesting. What do you do with a woman in her mid-60s who wants to have a peaceful life, who wants to let this go, who wants to have the ability to adapt and survive with challenges that may be there rather than thrusting them upon her, and who has musculoskeletal stiffness? And I thought to myself, well, what we have to do is we have to empower her and we have to treat her energetically and we have to treat her physically. And so the image that I had her carry was, when you were young, did you play at the seashore? Yes. What did you learn from standing in the breaking waves? When they hit you in the chest, they keep on knocking you back. What did you do? I learned to stand sideways and let the waves break around me. And I said, you are an incredible target for everything that might be evil in the world, but you are also married to the church. You have a tremendous obligation and a commitment to the divine. Stand sideways. Let that go beyond you because that is not of you. And then I said, I have a little pill for you to take, and I want you to take it half an hour before you go to bed, and I want you to go to bed with the image of standing sideways in the surf. I sent her back with 2 things. I sent her back with a sulfur-containing compound called methylsulfonylmethane, MSM, which is a wonderful precursor for a lot of the sulfur compounds that the body makes, which help in the binding and removal of many downstream metabolites and physiological toxins from the tissue in the liver. And I also sent her back with a couple of pellets of sulfur 10M, which is about as deep as I want to go with sulfur. Somebody asked me about a sulfur 10M, and I said this is a remedy that's appropriate for people who want to become visionaries and want to be able to enter and transit the cave of darkness. So it's not for someone who wants to dabble. But I figured this woman was, as we say in Connecticut, ready for Freddy. And she was. The father called me very excited a couple of weeks later that Sister, whatever her name was back doing her gardening and was very happy and didn't seem to be bothered at all. And so the reason for the story is to understand and appreciate that the medicines that we use, the botanicals that we use, the other formulas that we use, need to be nuanced to the needs of the individual. That if we don't quiet ourselves within, we don't listen to the individual, we don't empathize with them and try to see what it is that they're asking for, and what we can do that's least invasive, that helps them to find the trail of breadcrumbs out of the forest. That's really what we have to do. It's all about conveying information and allowing them to do the work on their own. Specifically in the eclectic pharmacy approach that I take, I'm very happy to tell you that I think I'm Eclectic Institute's first customer. I think I have the client number, which is at the start of the database. Why do I do that? Why do I use your materials? Why do I continue to use your materials? Am I friends with Ed Alstad? Yes, obviously I am, and I've continued that way. Why would I do that? I've never known him to misrepresent either his feelings about things or what he does or how he does it. And that is hugely important to me. The reason that that's important to me is I cannot be responsible for something I'm not doing working because the material that I'm using is ineffectual, is not what I'm anticipating, is less than standard for the company that's producing it. Yes, there are many different companies and many different standards, but I've come to rely on what Ed produces as being exactly how he represents it, because that's who he is. And that makes my job tremendously easier, because I don't have to worry about something not working because of the material. It would be not working because I haven't quite gotten it right, and then I'll, try to get it right. But probably about 95% of my tinctures that I use are eclectic tinctures. My pharmacy is framed around botanical tinctures. I would say I probably have 85 or 90 different tinctures that I draw from. I have freeze-dried botanicals and other things as well, but I rely very, very heavily on the tinctures. And I have things from the, I like to say, the ridiculous to the sublime. Slippery elm bark, as a demulcent, as a carrier agent. Comfrey to be used internally and externally as appropriate. Yes, I'm willing to run the chance with that. Two things that lie next to one another on the shelf. Allium sativa, garlic, smells wonderful. You pick it fresh, you do a good job extracting it, and right next to it is aconitum. Okay? Quite a different effect. Extraordinarily toxic and challenging even at low doses. Why would I have that in my pharmacy? Why could I use that? Because when used in very, very small doses, you can put it together with other botanicals, maybe tap it on your palm 10 times, and give it to the person to use as part of a formula, because part of the problem is that they're inherently fearful and they want to get beyond their fear. Marvelous aconitum combined with just a touch of datura for fear of flying, along with maybe a little bit of lactuca, a little lettuce, for that opioid-like effect. You want to allow them to not be hallucinating, but a little bit out of their body and whatever. And I tried this successfully with a relative in her mid-70s who'd been paralyzed by fear of flying for a long time. She lived in my neighborhood and whatever, and I said, I'd like you to go out to lunch with me today, and prepared the tincture before I went down to see her. And she said, where would you like to go? I said, Washington. She says, well, what do you mean? That's a 5-hour drive. I said, we're going to fly. Picked her up, went down to LaGuardia Airport, took the shuttle to D.C., got a boxed lunch, camped out on the Capitol grounds, ate the lunch, went back to the shuttle, back to LaGuardia, and dropped her home in the afternoon. But I started dosing her with a tincture and said, let go and breathe. I'm going to be sitting next to you. Our fates are joined. You don't have to worry, and just talked her through it. And once she broke the ice, the fear was gone enough that she could do what she needed to do to go forward. Was it my business to drill deep enough into her to find out that there might have been abuse or trauma if she didn't want to bring that up and share it? Not necessarily. That wasn't what she was asking for. She wanted to be liberated from something rather than having me dive deep and break it open. OptiGel, a product that I don't know if you still make anymore. It's a spiked ultrasound gel that typically has arnica and hypericum in it, maybe a little bit of symphytum. I'm making my own now, but I'm making it with regular ultrasound gel and Eclectic's arnica, hypericum, symphytum, and just a little bit of gelsemium, which is interesting for nerve pain. What do I do with it? When I was at National College, I had the privilege of studying physical medicine with a machine that was built in the 1930s, a Burdick ultrasound machine, this wonderful cream-colored box with a ultrasound head on it that I swore you could boil water with. It's just an amazing high-output machine. And when I went to Connecticut, I dearly missed the Burdick ultrasound machine. I was there for about a year, and I noticed there was a tag sale by an old-timey orthopod who was going out of business, and went over. He saw me looking at his microscope slides and said, "You're in medicine." I said, "Yes." He said, "What do you really want?" And I told him. He smiled. He brought me into his house. We went down to the basement. He flipped the tarp away, and there was the same machine, the same color, the same vintage, the same big power tubes, like, out of an old-fashioned science fiction movie. And I said, "Wow, that's it?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I want to buy it." He said, "You can't." I said, "Oh, no." He said, "No, I'm giving it to you because you know what it is and know how to use it, and I'm not going to run into anyone like that, and I'll probably die before it happens, and it'll end up in the scrap heap." So I brought it to my clinic, and I fired it up, and I've got it, and I'm using it today to do a process that's, I hope, still taught at National College, which is called phonophoresis. It's like iontophoresis, using electrical current to help salts migrate into the skin and treat the underlying tissue, which obviously Dr. Moore is very familiar with. Phonophoresis uses ultrasound to take botanical extracts, which are basically nonpolar, and tap them into the skin. The ultrasound machine works by turning radio frequency into actual physical vibration, which is communicated to the skin through the gel and oscillates many thousands of times a second and will actually cause a migration of the botanical into the underlying tissue. And it's tremendously effective. There are many ways of administering these botanical combinations that have what I believe are energetic as well as physical properties. For chronic sinus congestion, for bogginess in the nose, for clogging in the eustachian tube, it's possible to directly administer small quantities of a dilution of slippery elm, ephedra, and black hellebore. And black hellebore is primarily used by the medical community for projectile vomiting, uncontrolled diarrhea. It's the genus hyoscamine, and the alkaloid hyoscamine is the primary constituent in it, is used in drug therapy by the MDs. We can use small amounts of it in a preparation with a little bit of slippery elm and a little bit of ephedra, because it has a wonderful secondary effect of opening and drying mucous membranes. And is this part of the energetic signature? I'm not really sure, but it's a fascinating use for the plant. Gelsemium can be toxic in relatively small amounts, but when used in sufficient dilution and tapped, can be applied to the skin in combination with other tinctures. And what I like to do is to mix in just a tad of DMSO. And dimethyl sulfoxide is a wonderful nonpolar solvent, which allows whatever's dissolved in it to move transcutaneously into the underlying tissue. This property of dimethyl sulfoxide was found out, unfortunately, in a laboratory where one person had made up a sodium cyanide dimethyl sulfoxide solution, and a couple of drops had spilled on the table. Someone came by to talk and put his hand down in it, and of course was dead as a doornail within 30 seconds. So you have to be careful with it, but it's wonderful stuff to use to help move through the skin. The additional influence in my life growing up and wondering about alternative approaches to medicine, naturopathic medicine, the balancing and the continuum of physiological and energetic influences. To me, relating to patients, a lot of stories about what happened to me during my formative years in my environment, in my neighborhood, trying to have them talk to me about what was going on in their environment and their neighborhood to develop some sort of an empathetic relationship where they come into an office and I'm not wearing a white lab coat and have a tie on and have a stethoscope around my neck and do all of the rest of the standard hoo-ha. And so there's a there's a kind of a trust gap that needs to be bridged, and I often relate the story about the little area in my town which the local circus would come by once a year and use as a vacant lot, and I always thought it was kind of odd that there was nothing there. There was just some little bits of stone and brick that had suggested that there used to be a building. Well, apparently there was, until it was pulled apart brick by brick by the town. It was the Perry Naturopathic Clinic in Mamaroneck, and Perry was a graduate of the school in New York City, and apparently it fell out of favor enough that people not only encouraged Dr. Perry to move out of town, but pulled his operation apart. So the idea is that it reminded me that it's as important, if not more important, for the patient that we're working with the consumer of the eclectic product, with the people that are seeking our help, to be able to trust our counsel, to trust us as individuals, and to trust the remedies and the formulas that we're using as a preamble to working with us and anticipating cure, because without that, number one, they won't stay as patients, and also number two, perhaps there is a great impact of the placebo effect that is conveyed by trust in the practitioner that needs to go on. The continuum of care that's necessary with people in our society is predicated on all of the physicians working as counsels for the patient and helping them to empower themselves. And obviously we work in a society which is allopathically dominated. And to help patients understand how what we do is perhaps even more than a complement or an alternative to that, but is what I'm advancing as a necessary preamble. I explained to them that naturopathic / eclectic medical care is health care, that what medical doctors provide for them is disease management, that we concentrate and focus on trying to support and stimulate underlying physiological homeostasis and balance so the individual can manifest in a way which is more grounding and comfortable and solid for themselves, while the allopathic physician can do very little for them until they are pathological enough so that the pathology needs to be suppressed or the tissue needs to be ablated. What I explained to them about the physiological and the energetic qualities of what it is that we're doing is that their body manifests on a level which is a continuum from the most physical outward manifestation to the deepest mental, spiritual, and philosophical depths of their being, and that supporting and treating these areas is extremely important to any process that they might enter into with another physician, however invasive or allopathic it is. And I try to convince my colleagues that I can help their patients have less side effect reactions to their polypharmacy. I can help them to present a better profile at a pre-surgical screening, to tolerate anesthesia or induction more successfully, to undergo surgery with less bleeding and fewer cardiovascular issues, to recover from anesthesia and the effects of the surgery more quickly in shop, and also for first intention healing, or healing without scarring to occur with greater frequency and greater rapidity. And so I told them, look, you may end up using less drugs, you may end up doing fewer procedures, but they're going to think that you're great because your work looks good and you're going to get sued less. So you may be making less money, but you will be keeping more money. And that's very appealing to most medical doctors. So that works out fairly well. I wanted to tell you another patient interaction that I was privileged to have with another postmenopausal woman. My wife Susan and I do a lot of work with women in transition, and we end up keeping them as patients and working with them after through their perimenopausal period. And this woman had some musculoskeletal issues and was very fearful of having lumbar and sacroiliac adjustments done. And what I did to overcome the fear was to start on the physical level and work down into the energetic level by removing the impediments to healing, by allowing her to feel more and more mobile. She was able to release more and more, to feel less fearful more and more, and to allow me to work more deeply until I was able to accomplish what I was able to accomplish with her. And so it started out with superficial Swedish massage and went into trigger point therapy, and then went beyond that into Japanese-style electroacupuncture, proceeded deeper than that into phonophoresis with the Rubman's version of the Optigel that I described to you, and finally resulted in a rather brutal but effective SI adjustment, which sometimes is quite dramatic. But sometimes these things are necessary. But At other times, we have to, again, by honoring the patient, say, what are they looking for? When I was in school, I had the privilege of working with and being voted into the local stagehands union in Portland. And so I thought I had a very good balance of medicine during the day and rock and roll at night. That worked very well for me, and also allowed me to, pay for my rent. But one of my union brothers was a flyman, and that's someone who works off the side of the stage and who's continually pulling rope, bringing sets, what we call in and out, and in and out. And so he had the upper body of Arnold, it's just really one of these characters. And he had a rib that was out of place. And the man was a very nice, common, simple fellow who just wanted his body to feel well. He didn't want a number of therapies. He didn't want to leave with a handful of pills. He didn't want an explanation about my view of the cosmos. He wanted his back fixed. And so focusing on that allowed me to do what I needed to do with him, which was to put him in the hydrotherapy tank and cook him for about a half an hour. And I told him, I said, with the amount of musculature that you have in your back, I can't adjust you on the table. I'm going to put a couple of towels down on the floor. I put the towels down on the floor. I lined myself up really carefully, and I did a WWF move. I did a knee drop on his back. And there was this wonderful combination sound that was a cross between a crack and a schluck. And of course, I backed away and I just quieted myself, and I hoped that I hadn't broken a bone on the fellow, because obviously I wouldn't work in town again. But, he got up and went around and said, "Thanks, I needed that," walked out the door. So that's a sort of the psychospiritual side that is on the very, very physical end. On the other end, very interesting patient, treating with low potency homeopathics and botanical tinctures because she was too psychologically unstable to go deeper than that, but to hear her and not to judge her about how her growing up being abused by her mother was continuing, even though her mother had died, but was coming to her spiritually and keeping her awake and was poisoning her in the middle of the night. And very, very troubled and very delusional person, but not to judge and to hear and to try to select the appropriate remedies that would allow the person to do a little bit better, to unburden herself, but within the environment that I was listening to her, not saying that, oh yeah, that's right, I believe that, and it's death rays from Mars and, all the other stuff that she was coming up with, but that I'm not affected by that, I'm not offended by that, I'm not judging you because of that. And in clinical practice, using the pharmacy that we have and taking advantage of the materials that you're producing, it's so much more than what the consumer can read in a superficial herbal text. It's so much more than the well-intentioned MD might learn at the program at the University of Arizona. It's so much more than what was being taught in weekend seminars at the group that Atkins called the Foundations for Alternative in Medicine. Medicines, or FAME, oddly enough. And it's so much more than the information that's available to even the well-intentioned scholar in the books. It's studying with people who have mastered this, learning the tools of interacting, seeing how people interact with their patients, getting knowledge from that, and then literally practicing medicine, and that's why it's called practice. Exposing yourself to the uncertainty that what you're doing might not work or might not work as well as you need it to. But to this group today, to emphasize to you how incredibly important my relationship has been with Ed Alstad and with Eclectic Institute, and how seminal involvement your business here, this institution here, has for my practice. And I would literally be lost without Eclectic. So, thank you.